Hey there, welcome to Writers of Light podcast. My name is Andrea Mai, and today I'm visiting with Saul Luckman. And Saul is somebody who I met and discovered on Substack, looking for people who were maybe in covering similar subjects as me. And I was really stoked to find Saul because he does it in just an absolutely authentic and unique way. And so we're gonna talk about his new book that's coming out and just writing in general. As from what I've seen, Saul, you are not only a writer of books, but you're a songwriter, and let's just get into it and explore all of this together.
Sure, sure. Thanks for having me, Andrea. I saw that you were kind of officially launching the Riders of Light or on a different website or something. I shared that over in my notes feed today, and hopefully some people will
Thank
see that and get that rocking and rolling for you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a lot of work, right? When you have multiple platforms and kind of like getting it sort of in place to go. So, the website writersoflight.com has a little bit more on it than the Substack, but yeah, lots of good things lined up and like conversations like this and a whole lot more. So, but thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great. I've been doing conversations on Saul Luckman Uncensored off and on for years, and I've gotten back into it, mostly focused on conversations between writers, myself and another writer.
Yeah.
I interviewed, had a conversation with Denby Schiether recently, and I'm going to be having a conversation with Don Lester for too long, and that's been really fun. I always had this idea that it'd be fun as a writer interacting with other writers to not really have an interviewer or interviewee approach as much as just a conversation about the art of
Yeah.
writing and the kinds of things you're writing or would like to write or kind of wild ideas, pipe dreams, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I'm pursuing that a little bit too in parallel with what you're doing.
I love it. I think the more of us having these, just like you say, conversations. I like to riff. I like to have conversations, chats, um, because we're human beings pursuing this, and there's so much we can learn from each other, and still put a little spotlight when somebody puts out a new book, that is, an exciting thing to share and talk about our actual message. But yeah, just going into the actual creative and evolutionary exploration that comes with writing, and with the writing life, especially. A lot of people write a book, but maybe like they're not they don't consider themselves in the writing life. And so I'm always extra excited when I meet somebody who you've been at this as long as I have, I think.
Yeah, I saw you've written all these books. It's kind of amazing. I see a few of them behind you, but yeah, it seems like we're both pretty serious about it.
Yeah, yeah. So what got you started? I know you've done quite a bit, fiction and nonfiction. Where was the entry point for you?
Yeah, I don't even know if I've ever talked about this publicly. That's a great question. People usually want to know what got me into metaphysics or spirituality or healing or that kind of thing. So in terms of writing itself, I was I had this really interesting scenario in seventh grade where the I was being bullied by my teacher basically, and everybody knew it. It was a horrific situation. All the other students knew it, and I called her out on this. We had the principal come in. Nobody even stood up or peeped, and supported me, even though every single person in the class knew that this was going on. And so it was an awful experience. And I was heading into the eighth grade, and my mother, who had a lot of counseling and psychology background, she's like, if you really want to get back at that teacher, why don't you just be a really great student and blow everybody away in the eighth grade? I wasn't terrible, but I wasn't excelling to the extent that I later did. And she said, I said, well, that's interesting. I don't know. I don't even know if I like, reading and stuff because this was basically the teacher she was talking about was the English and language arts teacher for eighth grade at the time. And so she said, I've got just the book for you. And so she produced The Hobbit. And
Okay.
that book simply changed my life. And I never looked back. And I knew by the time I finished it that I wanted to write stories.
Wow. Yeah, that's when we come to it because we've fallen in love with some story that really opened us up, oh man, I want to do that.
Yeah,
uh,
I mean, I never saw it coming. I mean, I guess I entered into this with a revenge motivation. You know? But it worked out great because, my mom's like, you know how teachers talk, and so you're going to make this other teacher, the seventh grade teacher, look really bad if you're an excellent student. And then lo and behold, I ended up being a really fine student at eighth grade, and then it just kind of built on itself when I entered high school. I ended up being valedictorian and all this other stuff. But anyway, it's just a funny story. So if I've shared that before, I can't recall doing it.
well, well, awesome. A first reveal here of your early
Exclusive.
beginnings.
How did you get into writing?
Oh man, I started writing um, poetry and that kind of thing. I was a big reader. I loved, I think a lot of people know Madeline L'Engle for The Wrinkle in Time. I didn't understand that, but I loved all of her other books. She was a big influence when I was young. Every book that had a story about a writer, there were quite a lot of them. Of course, Little Women. Uh, I've read that book, I don't know, 18 times, seen all the movies probably just as many times, in large part because, she wanted to write. Uh, yeah, many of the books that I came across, my parents owned an old high school that had been closed down. And in the attic of that school were all of these books from like the 30s and 40s and way back before then. And boy, there's nothing like a dusty old attic full of old books and play books to really get your imagination going. And so that's kind of where it started for me. And I also had a lot of writers in my family, not professional writers, but lovers of story and always sitting at their typewriters. My grandmother was one of my biggest cheerleaders. And also, I'd have her on here today.
That's
If she,
great. That's great. Yeah, I should shout out to my maternal grandmother was a writer, and I had a great grandfather on my paternal side who was a writer. So I had a little bit of that in my family too.
yeah, yeah, it's pretty cool. I was never somebody who had a lack of cheerleaders, and for that I'm incredibly grateful because as I've gone on in life, I've found out that wasn't the case for a lot of people. That lineage of support was incredible at an early age. Yeah. Well, thank you for playing along with that. Oh, so you've written fiction. Can we talk about your fiction a little bit? Because I've only kind of came onto the scene of your work in the last year or so, and I entered into it through your writing about human expansion and, like you say, metaphysics, that kind of thing. What was it like to get into fiction and then make that shift? There's a whole bunch of. I have so many questions, but we'll just start with the whole fiction thing. When did you first really start taking it seriously? And
Well, that's what I always wanted to do growing up was write novels. And so I studied writing and literature in college and then studied literature in graduate school. And the first things I wrote that you might call books were novels. A couple of them weren't that great, but they were at least manuscripts. And one of them is was decent, and it's sitting in my to-do list to totally go in and eviscerate it and make it into something brand new one of these days.
Mhm.
I don't want to rewrite it. I want to explode it and put it back together because it's got a lot of interesting parts. Um,
Oh, man.
yeah, so I know that it can be very hard to rewrite a manuscript, and I don't want to like repeat the past, but I want to use that as a seed for something new. And then I wrote a big novel, my first big novel. I wrote this back when I was ill with an autoimmune, or started it when I was sick with an autoimmune illness back in the 90s, and that was called Beginner's Luke. And it was pretty massive. It was about 1,100 pages of manuscript. I submitted it to a New York publisher who agreed to publish it. I mean, a real bona fide, reputable publishing house, but they wanted to break it up into six parts because it was six books. And
Right.
I don't, I just, the more I sat with that, the more I wasn't thrilled about it. And then there was some other red flags that I had that had nothing to do with the professionalism or anything like that, but I just felt like I didn't want to ultimately give my power away, or, the power over my manuscripts and that sort of thing. And I tried to bring it out on my own. I ended up breaking it up anyway because I realized how prohibitively expensive it was going to be to publish it by myself. And it just never really took off, even though the first book, it's quoted all over the place. You'll see Beginner's Luke quotes, in various places. I mean, it's kind of funny where it found its way to. So I'm in the process of reworking, in a sense, the entire manuscript. I've basically finished that, and I'm just waiting to publish it when the dust clears from this current book that I'm publishing, Get Out of Here Alive. And I'm going to bring out Beginner's Luke. It's subtitled The Adventure of an Imaginary Lifetime, and it will be long. It's very metafictional, very picaresque, super experimental. I probably use every rhetorical and discourse advice that's ever been done before in literary or otherwise, fiction. So it's all over the place. It has everything from dramatic elements to journalism. It's satirical, parodic. It does it all. And this is the story of the eponymous narrator, Luke, who realizes that he is imaginary and that he's inventing his life as he goes along. And it's basically his learning to harness that power and not have it harness him that is the story of the book.
Very similar. It's like the fictional version of what you've been writing about in your newest book. It kind of feels,
That is absolutely right. I've said that this novel is the fictional companion to Get Out of Here Alive.
yeah. Let's talk about that, man, because it's been on my heart to kind of do the same thing. I know that I have been writing a lot about a particular subject in nonfiction for the last few years, and I'm really ready to. My heart just wants to jump into the sweetness of crafting a story again. It's calling in all these ways. What is that? Well, A, have you actually started doing it? If I missed that, I'm sorry. But have you
The
started
story.
that process? Yeah, let's just explore it. Like,
So started what? I'm a little confused. The process
have you started actually t doing the exploding and revising
of the first novel.
of the first novel?
No, I have not started that. I've really wanted to get Beginner's Luke out there, and I know that that's going to take a monumental effort to just, bring it out, get the audiobook together, do it justice, get some reviews and that kind of thing, and give it a chance to be discovered. So I feel like if I'm in the middle of writing another significant book, I just won't have the focus
Yeah,
to do that justice. So
yeah.
my plan is to begin writing some additional articles related to the material in Get Out of Here Alive and see if those become a book at some point. I'm also
Mhm.
writing, there's this new body work, breath work, self-care self-alchemy thing that I have introduced on my Substack called Pragmalchemy, which I do mention and Get Out of Here Alive in context. And I'm, I'm writing. Um, when they're recorded, they're about 20 to 25 minutes long, the exercises, the descriptions of the exercises. So I'm doing that with the idea that maybe sometime way down the line, and this would probably be years from now, it might become another book of exercises for this approach to self-healing where I would have like an introduction, it would have photographs, that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
in the meantime, I'm just writing down how to do these various exercises that involve the breath work, that I'm teaching the body work with a wooden block I'm calling an Ouroboros, and the imagination or applied attention that I'm teaching how to utilize in tandem with those other aspects.
Beautiful. Now, you're teaching these things through this program. Do you also work with people in like directly about these things, or is it more through your books?
Yeah, all of my healing work for years now has been remote. I don't work with people in person. I don't even do trainings in person anymore for people who
Yeah.
want to get certified. I just do that online with people.
Okay. Okay. So so you have this idea to to basically cross over into fiction and bring these ideas, these theories, these knowings into story form. It's it's like it's the Ouroboros, is that the is that the snake eating its own
Yeah, yeah,
tail?
sure is. Sure.
Right. So like the book that started you, then it shifted and then we're coming back around. Like, is there something in there?
Well, the funny
Uh
thing is that there's a novel that I wrote or that I published back in 2014 called Snooze, A Story of Awakening. And, it was a very daring title to call a novel Snooze, but people loved this book and had lots of reviews. And it was aptly titled because the character's nickname was Snooze, the main character. And he was a young savant of sorts who was just born gifted with the ability to enter the dream world as a lucid dreamer. And so eventually the plot evolves so that he finds himself in the dream world, like in body, looking for his father who's become lost there, for reasons I won't divulge, so I don't spoil it for anyone who wants to check it out. But he
yeah.
meets his own doppelganger. Max is the character, aka Snooze. He meets his own doppelganger self, his twin, who's his etheric double, but he meets him in the dream world, and they are the Ouroboros. I mean, there's actually a statue of these characters back to back with their faces going either way. That's like the figure of Janus, but it's Max and his twin. They look, of course, exactly alike, and they're facing opposite directions. So, they're playing a very archetypal role in the story in uniting the realms of space-time and time-space, these parallel realities, so that they are the Ouroboros. So I've been thinking about this kind of sort of meta fictional. I almost want to say meta mystical type of material for a very long time.
Yeah. And it's got to be the kind of thing. Do you find that it's almost as if this Ouroboros is the real message that that you're exploring, like that it's coming out in your work in many ways, even self-healing, when we find out that we are the healer, and we are also often the breaker of ourselves,
Hmm.
unknowingly, and then we find we can heal. I don't know. I I was knowing that you were going to bring me to a new level in this conversation because I don't normally I keep these things, in my journal. I'm not having these kinds of conversations. So I'm excited. So if I stumble around in this conversation, so it's a happy stumbling. with
Yeah, it's
with
great. We have to have these free spaces to do this because we're not really given space to have these conversations unless we make them because our whole culture, like you go to post a video on YouTube and you choose a category, right? There is no category for healing, consciousness,
yeah,
um, uh, energy medicine. There's nothing there for you.
yeah,
They don't want people really exploring this, not really, especially not with things that work.
right.
They'll let if it's fear-based or if it doesn't really work, they'll pay you to put it out there. I believe that's what these algorithms are all about. But otherwise, they're gonna shadow ban you till kingdom come. I just wrote a song called Shadow Band, and in the lyrics, if you're out there listening in whatever land, sorry if you can't hear me, I've been shadow banned.
Oh man, I think that you're onto something there. Yeah, it's funny. I've been trying to find and connect with people around intuitive writing, around automatic writing, and I thought I would find a whole slew of videos of blogs, and it's actually a very slim search. Like the search is not pulling up very many results, so I have to lean in to my own intuition and just see where it takes me. But I'm like, I thought, well, surely it's 2025. I should be able to find much more of this uh, without specifically saying channeling, right? As sort of a big keyword. Let me find intuitive writing. Let me find automatic writing. Uh, and it's either super, super old or there are very few people, or it takes you down a completely different road that has nothing to do with it. Uh, so anyways, yeah.
Right, and I would wager anyway that channeling would have gobbled up a lot of that these days, and that colors it in a certain way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not exactly what I was going for. So so yeah, we do need these playgrounds, and that's a big part of why, this podcast exists. I want to have all the conversations. I want a place for us to have all the conversations, for those of us in these spaces, in these fields, and not need to. I want so much for people not to have to feel like they need to couch their language or preface it because they're concerned, because that's the podcast they're used to being on. Uh, you know, if bring the woo, if that's what you call it. That's not what I call it, but bring your big conversations and let's have them here. And let's also like geek out on writing. Yeah, so
Good comment. I'm like,
you know. Um yeah, so got fiction, we've got nonfiction. I've listened to some of your music and I love it. I love it. It's kind of got that new wave sound. Uh, at least the parts I've listened to. Let's talk about that a little bit.
well, I mean, what I really have always wanted to do is just write lyrics that I like, and I wrote a memoir back several years ago where I described one episode. It was almost like a manic episode of lyric writing, where it just kind of poured out of me. I have this really funny thing that happens in December, where there's a certain alignment we get with Galactic Center. I don't know this. Here's if you want me to bring the woo, I'm bringing it
Bring it, bring it. As I
because
said,
I
I may
think of
not have
that.
all the language, but let's make it happen.
Well, I think of that as source, and that's
Okay.
also central sun. That is many things. The great eagle in shamanism, lots of names for it. But when that alignment occurs, almost invariably, I get just electrified with creative energy, and I end up doing something. So I was writing about, an episode years ago, a public. Well, I wrote this Musings from a Small Island. It's an artist's memoir. It has a lot of my paintings in it. I wrote that years ago, and it was published. couple years ago. So I reveal some of my process around lyric writing, which often is really fast. I can go out on the beach or whatever and just, produce a song. I can produce a song in minutes sometimes just lyrically. I know there have been like some people I know have taken years and they've labored over songs like Leonard Cohen and Hallelujah. He literally spent decades working on this song. And then you get people like Prince who could write lyrics, come up with the basic music and work on it for a little while and record it all in one afternoon. It was just
Right.
shocking, how fast he could do that kind of thing. So, my process around lyric writing is mostly super fast because I really don't want to come at it from a left brain perspective. I want to just let it pour out, kind of like the automatic writing thing that you're talking about, and just see
Yeah.
see what shows up, from that part of me because because it's basically poetry, I don't have to censor myself. I don't have to make sense.
Yeah.
I don't have to tell a story if I don't want to. I can say basically anything I want to. I can be irreverent. I can be, out of character if I want to be, because maybe I'm in someone else's voice. In that sense, you could say that songwriting can have a narrative aspect where you basically become an assumed narrator. You're somebody else telling a story from that perspective, and so that happens in songs all the time. So that's really cool. You can kind of use a fictional technique in your delivery if you don't want to be in propria persona for that particular song. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have a lot more to say than that, except that it's a
Yeah, well, I know it played a big influence. It was it was actually a really awesome influence in your new book. Reading, you really tied in music and these quotes, and obviously you have a very rich life of creative influences, and that was it was actually really refreshing to see because I've noticed my dwindling sort of stash of that because I'm on the search for something new, and I for something that hasn't been yet. It's part of what I feel called to. But what I got to see was how you took these elements that really have touched you or influenced you somehow in the past, and then how you're still taking those and bringing them into what is now and what we are creating. It was actually it was really well done, and so I just wanted to just drop that to you and let you know that I appreciate your ability to draw on so many influences, and I can tell like this obviously it felt like in reading the work that you've really have sat. I mean, you've stewed in this stuff is what it felt like. And it's inspiring, I guess, is what I'm saying.
cool. Thanks. I really
Yeah.
appreciate that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
really try to give a when I'm working on anything, I love the multi-perspectival approach. I think of it as more multi-dimensional, not just 3D, but literally coming from just different souls, different
Yeah.
incarnations, different minds, different consciousnesses, And I love that being able to touch on a subject from all of these different angles so that you may not agree with my perspective, but here's 15 other people who do, and they're a lot more famous than you are.
There you go. Yeah, I I'm I've had on a few other guests writing all different kinds of things, and fiction especially. This is one that I'm really excited to see how we evolve the way fiction is done when we move past narratives of, somebody needing to be a victim or a martyr. Uh, I don't know what the new landscape is, but I feel it coming. I feel it in my bones. And so I'm really being drawn into looking at it again. And it's actually been it's been a while. I feel like some weirdo going back in time to look at the books that influenced me to find out who are the people now. Is anybody having these sort of um, evolving consciousness fictional stories happening? And all of a sudden, as soon as I like really opened that up for myself, all of a sudden they're showing up. I'm just not a lot of them. Everything's still kind of based in the old narratives that we've been playing with, of there's always got to be a bad guy, you know, it's always looking out. And so I don't know. Do you have any sense uh, of what you would like to see in as we kind of shift?
Yeah, I mean, I when I was thinking about doing like a podcast or something a long time ago, I wanted to call it conscious fiction. So just so you know, very much in aligned with sort of your general idea here. So, I mentioned a couple of these books that I've worked on in the past, and in Snooze, for example, there's really not a bad guy. I mean, there are challenges. It's truly a hero's journey, but like a real hero's journey, you like, I think Joseph Campbell's work in the hero's journey invites us to think that very, very archetypally, in a very Jungian way, that the characters that we meet on our journey are aspects of ourselves. Therefore, there's no real villain. It's basically a journey of self-discovery. So I took that on very much in Snooze, very much in Beginner's Luke. There's a little bit more of a bad guy in Kali the Destroyer, because that was a book about the goddess and basically a young woman in a future dystopian society, sort of with some elements of things like Hunger Games and some other novels out there, but where she basically ends up embodying the goddess, coming back to set things to rights vis-a-vis the Lord Archon, the Demiurge, So
Yeah.
there is the Demiurge who appears as a character in that book, which is kind of wild. So I couldn't get around that one. But I agree that these old structures having to do with a victim, a perpetrator, a bad guy, a good guy, all of that, these are ripe for being reinvented in different ways. I'm more interested in the. I used to be really heavily into formalism and stylistics, and so Beginner's Luke really reflects that because it's such a writerly book. I'm
Right.
saying it's not fun to read because it's screamingly funny, or so I've been told. And some of the early reviewers of the early volumes of that thought it was just a gas, really. But you know, that was a lot of my focus, even though I was also writing about some of these subjects that we've been talking about. But when I got around to Snooze and Callie, I I I decided that I actually wanted to write something that would be very approachable from basically a mainstream reader. And they think possibly, maybe if they've taken a lot of drugs, that they're reading a normal book, right? And then it slowly changes their lives and their consciousness as they read it because it's so different foundationally, but not stylistically from what they're used to.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this. I'm allowing that to actually sink into me for a minute.
Like the book doesn't have to wear its experimental character on its sleeve. It can masquerade as a normie book. And that's what you want because that's like the earworm that goes in the normie mind and begins to
Yeah.
evolve that NPC into like a real soul, a real person.
Yeah. Yeah, and that there is I've been going back and visiting books that I years ago that I still like I think, oh, that they were actually written for now, more than ever. And seeing how they did it and what I thought was maybe like maybe it wasn't strong writing, but it was really effective. And not really a judgmental thing, just like, oh, this is so important, this message. I'm surprised. it had the impact because of the writing. And I'm like, oh, wait, maybe I'm missing the mark. Maybe the fact that it was so very accessible is actually how it got to have the impact um, that it did.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that with a number of books, Celestine Prophecy, The Alchemist, some other things, books that I would not consider well written,
Yeah.
but that had a spirit in them that was undeniable and a certain message that was delivered in a certain way at a certain time for a certain kind of person, and it just
Mhm.
worked.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's fun because I would say that fiction is my least um I write it because it makes me happy to write it. I don't know if I'm good at it. Like effective at it, let's say that um but then there's the style, like the language choice, the rhythm, the beat to it that's always really important to me. Um but now I'm like, oh, I feel like I've evolved at this point. It's been almost 8, 10 years since I last wrote fiction. And I'm like, ooh, who do I show up as today? And so I'm curious, like, you've gone through this for quite a long time. You've tried a lot of different things, different genres, you might say different subjects, but maybe it's all the same subject, just come at in many ways. But your own evolution as a guy who's been writing for what, 20 years maybe, and publishing. So
Probably 30.
yeah, you know, what's it like to show up as you today with your pen in hand and your past so that book that you talked about just a minute ago, right? You went through like uh, you trained for it in schools, right? In university, you went through these programs and came out, and what you described, how you described yourself, uh, I would say is pretty typical of people who come out of those programs. You want to write the writerly book.
Right.
Um, so
But even then, I was so subversive because I wanted to write the writerly book that was about spiritual and metaphysical things
yeah,
and really blow people's minds from a different perspective. That was my goal.
yeah,
Like I saw so much. I mean, so many of the writers who come out of these programs, because these programs are nested within what I call the world cult. I wrote a book, a couple books back, The World Cult and You. And it's this idea that the world's a big cult designed to kind of control your thinking and harvest your energy. And one of the great centerpieces of the world cult is the university system. And so you have all these writers coming from these creative writing programs, and you think, gosh, they should be like really happy people. They should be good people. They should write really good, uplifting books, and they're materialists and empiricists and skeptics and just shrunken little spirits very often. It's sad to see, and I've seen it for years and years, and it's only gotten worse. And you do have people who buck that trend, so this doesn't apply to everybody who's ever been through a writing program, but it is shocking how consistent this is.
yeah.
The
Well,
life is squeezed out of these
yeah.
people as they go through that academic system. I mean, I wrote a book, back in I think 2017 called The Angel's Dictionary, and it was kind of a modernization of Ambrose Bierce's The Devil's Dictionary. And so I'm writing dictionaries. And so like my definition for academia was terminal condition in which the head something like in which the head inflates while the heart atrophies. So academia is.
Oh, I dig that you wrote your own dictionary. I mean, that's awesome. I'm a word nerd. I love etymology and I love flipping language around, and I'm doing it a lot more, but I haven't yet written a book devoted to it. I think it's going to be a stand-up comedy act, actually. You know, taking language and my favorite in this last recently is our skin, we shed skin cells and then shed, right? We also have a shed out in our backyards full of our unnecessary belongings. And I don't know, just like how do these words, we look at one as practical and one as like a bodily function, and I don't know, they seem the same to me. I won't be on stage anytime soon, but
Yeah, well, you're right though. I mean, you can do a lot with like relating things in funny ways or even using false etymologies. Like false etymologies can be extremely revealing, even if there's not a linguistic basis for the connection, because there's possibly some weird afterthought, culturally speaking, that connected those words, you know.
yeah. Well, so tell me, you've done your Saul Luckman uncensored, and do you do that often, or just kind of as a when you get the itch?
It's a habit I'm trying to break. No, I mean, in all seriousness, it's just kind of like my blog and my website rolled into one. I do have another website, but mostly my presence is on the Substack, and I
Mhm.
like that I can have all the multimedia aspects I want to in one format. I like that I can create a lot of free content, but that I can have some behind the paywall. I like that there's the notes function and the chat function and all of that kind of integrated. And I also think the team is pretty responsive to because I've been here long enough to know that things were less developed and sophisticated when I got here a couple 3 years ago, and they continue to really put a premium on building out the functionality. So that's really cool. And then I've met a lot of fascinating people like you, on here. And I can't say that other other venues that I've been on have ever been quite as interesting to be honest. I mean, there's a lot of writers on Substack that I do not care for and do not want to have anything to do with. I don't want any truthers or people writing about politics or just no way. But I've met a lot of very creative, spiritual, open, curious, free thinking types. And there's just getting to be more of us, which I'm
Yeah.
really excited about. I mean, I've kind of I think this would be really impossible because these people that I'm describing are almost by definition difficult to difficult to lead in a certain way because they're leading themselves. It's kind of like herding frogs to bring them all together. But I do have this kind of idea that if we could ever kind of bring ourselves together on Substack and create some kind of writers summit or something, the thing that Substack doesn't really have that I think would be tremendous is if they could ever do groups.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that would be, and that would be fantastic because you would have a shot at bringing people together in the ways that I'm describing.
Yeah, I'm curious because I haven't played with the threads part of it, and I wonder if that's a way in a little bit to start to make that happen. I've read people talking about how that's how they run their paid subscriber groups, for lack of a better word, in that way. Is that what you're talking about? Like where
I'm
we can
talking
have our
more
inner
like
conversation?
Facebook groups where people from different platforms can come together and have conversations that are not isolated in notes or your chat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's something more like a group where people can post content, where they can share different things, like Facebook groups, because that is a huge networking opportunity for for people still on Facebook, us old timers, all the
Yeah.
kids are gone, they're long gone, they're TikToking away.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah, no, I love this. And I think that's, it's a big part of with Writers of Light. I have some ideas of I want to have a writer's salon, and I'm close. I'm not quite there yet in terms of what that looks like, but I feel its drumbeat in me, and it's this space of how do we come together and support each other in these kind of, you know, far out weird, not there aren't really a lot of playgrounds for us where we can gather. Um, Part of it, I mean, you had posted a thing back when you were beginning to share your book and putting it up for people to give the reviews. And there was something in it, um, just the way you were talking so openly about it was almost like it surprised you that people were doing these sort of cross promotional efforts. And I loved, I guess I loved that you were really honest about it, because I heard you a couple of times, one on a podcast with the biofield tuning, McCusick. You were
Ivy.
talking, yeah, you were talking with her, and then you just kind of posted about it, I think, maybe. Uh, and other communities have, I think, this big infrastructure around them available. If you're in if you're a romance writer, if you're they have like their guilds and their little collective groups, but those of us who maybe we don't fit quite as tidily into a box, um, and we don't want to, but then how do we come together and support each other?
Oh,
This
you
is
nailed it because I put out the call to other people to maybe do swaps
yeah.
to promotion swaps, right? And hardly anybody took advantage of that. But you can go onto one of these normie romance writer sites and just everybody's doing it like crazy and they're doing their Facebook group takeovers and all this stuff and just the word gets out and people are buying the books and it's all the big party. But for people like me, I mean, I'm a lone voice crying in the wilderness most of the time.
Yeah, and we're used to that because we kind of we have been we've been the lone wolf because people didn't get it, or we just felt, a lot of times we isolated ourselves. Or it's like I said, I've been looking for books. They're starting to show up. The kind of thing I'm talking about, but see, it's almost there's so many layers, right? There's so many layers of being isolated for a long time, and then we sort of start to believe that we can't come together or something. You know, there's layers probably of healing around a release, let's call it release around that. But yeah, so I loved that you brought that up, and it really did stick with me and it shifted. So thank you for just being so open about it on Substack. I don't know. It's not that you maybe said anything that was, it wasn't like necessarily a vulnerability. It was just a statement that I'm like, yeah, how do we get this playground? Let's create this, let's co-create this playground. So anyways, I'm in. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think that may be how we ultimately connected. So it wasn't for naught, and that's really good, but it was very, very, underwhelming, the response to that. So yeah, I'm probably going to permanently be in head scratching mode. I mean, I really do believe that I've been shadow banned, that I am as anti-niche as I can possibly be. The idea of writing to market makes me want to hurl. I don't like most of the things that are going on in the writing world, even if I appreciate a lot of mainstream and quote unquote successful writers' prose and their ability to write. I hate their message. I don't find that I resonate with it. I just can't stand it. It makes me just want to just run away. This happens all the time. I mean, somebody like Stephen King, I don't want to be in the room with somebody like that. I just, no way. So I can't go there, and I'm very, very particular, and more so every day about the type of energy I allow near me. The type of human energy and consciousness that I allow to get anywhere near me. And so I don't, I'm not really here to make new friends necessarily. I'd love to in some ways, but I'm also extremely wary about this whole idea of the world cult and where people, handlers show up and you don't know that they're handlers. This happens all the time. It's happened to me, and people who want to subvert your message, siphon off your energy, sidetrack you in some way. It happens all the time. People don't realize it because they're not, maybe they haven't had some of my experiences, or they're not energetically attuned to this dynamic. But once you begin to see it, it's kind of everywhere. And I'm not saying it's always conscious and devious. A lot of times I just think it can be very organic, but it can still work against you.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is something, as I've started to approach authors who maybe they've been around for a while, I feel that from them, and I can respect, uh, I feel from them that they're used to that happening to them. And so how do I keep my energetic clean, keep my frequency attuned to the kind of people I want to draw in to these conversations so that we can create a space, because I still see most of them. I think there's more people who are unsuccessful or not to the level of what success, right? Never mind. I'm not going to trip myself up on that word, but whatever that means for them, whatever it is they're working to create and build, they're not getting there in part because we've had to keep these boundaries in place against those who aren't. But then how do we open it to where there is a supportive place where people aren't going to feel that the what did you call it? Handlers, right? Where they can just come in and we can actually it's a hard road, honestly, sometimes when you are called to start being something in this world that doesn't have room for it. When we're
Mm.
carrying a message, when we're sharing a message that goes against the norm, it, I think there's a way in which we can bury ourselves in the work. We can love the work and thrive, and we want to share these things because we're so into it. We're so passionate about it. Or we just know it's something we're here to share. It's part of what we're here for. We can't continue to be isolated, I guess is what I'm saying. So somehow we're gonna, I hope, my sincerest hope is that I at least can create a space where people who would feel normally like they might not go be on someone's show, or they might not put themselves out with people they're unfamiliar with because of that energetic issue. Like, oh,
Mm.
I don't know. It's a pain, and we can feel it in our brothers and sisters out there who really are here to bring in something incredibly bright and wonderful for the world. And yeah, so thank you, I guess, for speaking to that. Um,
Yeah, I would say another, yeah, I mean, we obviously have been thinking about this in similar ways for a while, and understanding some of the difficulty of the terrain. Another difficulty of the terrain that, that kind of showed up, I believe, even in my putting out this call to do promo swaps, is that writers are just selfish. And I'm as guilty of being that way as anybody, and it's very hard for me to get out of my creative mode enough to support somebody else. And so for me to even make that offer was coming out of my little studio, as it were, and being willing to read someone's book, write a review of it, maybe do an interview, post it on my Substack, and help them get some exposure. And I was I was clear that I'm going to do this. And the fact that practically nobody took me up on that offer it's just wild. It's absolutely, it's not like I
yeah.
have no audience. I have about 12,000 subscribers on my Substack, so it's very, very interesting.
Uh, I would say so, I know that you did that, and I knew for me, I wanted to complete what I said I would do for you. That was kind of like a thing I wanted to do. And before I then took you up on your offer. So it may come around, right? I wanted to actually hold to my word that I was going to do this thing. because we often say we'll do something, and we even have good intentions, but we don't. Um, so I don't know. I know in my case, and when you're also maybe not brand new, uh, you're not right in a launch phase on something, you know, or you're moving on to the next thing as us wild and crazy, chronic creators are,
So,
So I know I intend to come back and ask you when I have the next project ready, because I'm closing down not I'm not closing down the energy, but the launch effort of my last book. It's now it's shifted and we're moving into something new. Um,
yeah,
but
because I
yeah,
got the idea that you could, I mean, that some of this could take the form of conversations like this, where it's less of an interview and it's more of a back and forth, you know. I mean, that even that art can be perfected and expanded on in terms of how inclusive the discussion is, in terms of its directionality, me versus you, and then, some coming together. Um, and some of that is just organic in terms of the nature of the interaction, that two people coming together on a given day to talk about something. But the idea was that I was having was that conversations like this could really feature both parties,
yeah,
ultimately in some way. And so that both people benefit from just having the conversation, just being willing to have the conversation in a public sphere. You don't have to agree on everything, but at the very least, you are in a kind of mutual assistance mode where you're just having that conversation in a place that people can listen to it.
yeah, yeah. Well, let's keep encouraging that to happen. You know,
Sure, yeah, I like that. We'll
you
do.
know.
I mean, I'm not opposed to it. In fact, I'm doing more of it. Like I said at the beginning of our chat here today, I've been reaching out to various people just to have some of these conversations because people typically enjoy them.
Yeah,
It's not so focused on a single subject. It's more of an open exchange between two interesting people who have interesting projects going on. And
yeah,
there's a lot of good that can come out of just that conversation. I like to think of it less as an interview, and it's more like meeting somebody, either a friend or somebody you've never met, like at a coffee shop and sitting down and just talking for an hour
yeah,
about what you're doing, who you are, what you're up to.
yeah. And just getting through, I think we're shifting to it's for a long time, people wanted experts, you know, and now we can just lean more and more into one human connecting to the other, and where do we have these juicy points that we can explore um together, or not, but still have a conversation and it not be a lecture, you know.
Right.
That's I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm even in some of my interviews, I know people want to hear what I have to say on these things, but I feel like I'm asked a lot of questions that I already wrote about in the book. Just go read the book. Let's talk about something else, Let's talk about, whatever. But, I don't want to just regurgitate the same stuff over and over.
Yeah. But I mean, it is a little bit unusual, honestly. A lot of people, that's what they want to beat the drum or recap the book in great depth, and then there's not much to read about. But so good for you for recognizing that early on, or earlier on, anyways. So what's something that you want to share today? What's something that um because we're coming up here, we're a little over an hour, and I want to begin to bring us into the end of this beautiful conversation. Um, but yeah, is there anything more that you want to cover or talk about?
Yeah,
Or
I would love to just give people an overview of where I am with the publication of this book and its various forms so that people know where to get it and what to expect. Also, I'm still giving away free review copies, so you have until March 20th, which is the equinox, to download your free review copy of the book. So you can find that over at my Substack. I link to it off of various blog posts. It's at saulluckman.substack.com. So you have until March 20th to do that. I'm also serializing the audiobook of Get Out of Here Alive on Substack, and I read it. So I'm not saying it's perfect or even professional, but at least it's me. So I'm sharing sharing the chapters. It'll come
Yeah.
out in 19 installments. That's the preface and introduction as one installment, and then the book has 18 chapters. It's not terribly long. It wouldn't take you that long to read it. Some people have read it in a day. And so there's that. And then the paperback, I get a lot of people, which is really interesting in this the golden age of digital media. So many people want a paperback of this book. I'm shocked. I'm like, you still read paperbacks? I mean, I still love them, but I rarely read them. So that is coming out as well. So that'll be available on Amazon and wherever good books are sold. So please, support the book with a review. And that's really the best way other than just buying it on Amazon and supporting me that way, that's the best way I know of to get me into the algorithm, as much as I hate that word and that concept. And that can help get the book out there more than anything else.
Yeah, it's really true. And man, it was like you threw down the gauntlet at just the right time when you started doing that for me, because I've always done a very poor job on my launches. Like they're practically non-existent. I just had to keep writing. Uh, and so I'm at that stage in my journey with this of let's do better. And boy, you did it. You sparked something. And definitely if you get a chance, for you who are listening or watching this, take him up on that copy and leave a review for him. It's a really cool book. Uh, I I just posted a review of it on BookBub and I don't know, Goodreads. It had to dust off my accounts.
Right. Find a
Like,
password.
so yeah. So saulluckman.substack.com. That's right.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Hit him up there. The links for all of this will be in the notes to this. But it's if you don't get the free one, I encourage you, if this conversation sparks you in any way, go support his work. It's definitely like I I felt the rock and roll kind of rebel, I don't know, something else. There was a whole metaphysical rock and roll, like a demigod version of you. I felt this really cool aesthetic coming off of your work, and it really tickled me. It was really fun to read.
Oh, cool, cool. Yeah, I think
Beyond the message itself, it just as somebody who likes writers who write, you know.
Jacqueline Rendell, postmodern over on Substack. We had a wonderful interview recently, and she left a review, and her first two words were rebelliously refreshing.
Yeah, 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 exactly, exactly. All right. Well, Saul, thank you so much for coming on here today, and I look forward to all that we continue to do. Let's spark people up.
I love it. I love it. Thank you again for having me. This has been a fun chat. Really fun to just talk about writing for a change. Not all about spirituality and metaphysics and health issues.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's where I get to have all of my conversations I want to have around those things and the writing because we need it. We need a place where we can just, I'll say it again, geek out about writing, and our absolute love of it because it's what keeps us doing it if, you know. So, anyways, that's enough of me rambling. So folks, we will catch you next time. And I hope that you just keep shining and letting your light into the world. in every possible way. Have a good, good day.